This is apropos. The president of Taiwan has expressed his thanks to the United States for its help in strengthening the self-governed island's defences, pledging that Taipei will not give in to pressure ahead of high-stakes talks between Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart. The US president's visit to Beijing comes as Taiwan's reputation for cutting-edge technology makes it an increasingly viable alternative as Ukraine seeks to edge China out of its supply chain for vital drones. Jenny Shin has the story.
The 4 years of war in Ukraine have rewritten the needs of modern warfare, and at its forefront are aerial drones. Amid concerns that China is aiding Russia with military goods, Ukraine, as well as Europe and the US, have increasingly turned to Taiwan as an alternative supplier. Taiwanese drone maker Thunder Tiger Group specializes in manufacturing low-cost attack drones, mass-producible but also highly affordable.
The missile is $2 million. This we can make less than 100,000 台币, less than 30,000 US dollars. So this is something that we like to present to our military, present to the world.
Taiwan does face limitations, though, as Ukraine's vast wartime needs outpace the island's current output. Still, Taiwanese drone exports elsewhere in Europe surged more than 40-fold in 2025, with Poland and the Czech Republic among the largest markets. But beyond providing supply for other countries, Taiwan faces an urgent task: scaling up production for its own national defense. China has increased its military pressure in recent years on the island, which it considers a breakaway province. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te has promoted a $40 billion supplementary defense budget that includes funding for drones, as well as the integration of artificial intelligence.
With more, joined now by David Sachs, Fellow for Asia Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks, David, for being with us this evening. Firstly, how successful is Taiwan in positioning itself, do you believe, as an alternative when it comes to supplying drones? And can it scale up production, as we were talking about there in that report?
Well, Taiwan has incredible experience manufacturing, these types of precision products. Of course, it is the world's leader in probably the most difficult product to produce in human history, advanced semiconductors. And Taiwan has a whole ecosystem built around that, as well as a very sophisticated electronics manufacturing sector. So I think Taiwan is well placed to do this. But the issue, as noted in the report, is that Taiwan frankly was quite far behind in terms of drone production and development. It really got a kick from the war in Ukraine and certain lessons that it's learned from that. And as you noted in the report, exports have really ballooned from Taiwan. The special defense budget that President Lai put forward of $40 billion, it was passed by the legislature just a few days ago, but they only approved $25 billion of the 40, which is for funding certain purchases from the United States, but importantly does not fund a lot of the drone development that President Lai prioritized. So there's going to have to be another push in the coming months to put forward another special budget or significantly increase defense spending and do it through the regular budgetary process for Taiwan to build out its indigenous drone manufacturing sector.
And David, the island really in the spotlight tonight as Donald Trump heads to Beijing for that highly anticipated summit with the Chinese president. You're an expert when it comes to both Chinese relations with the US and also Taiwan's relations with the US. How much of a focus is there going to be on the island when these two world leaders meet this week?
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic because President Trump and his team has made clear that they're really interested in talking about economic issues. There's discussion about a board of trade with China. They want a big commitment from Beijing to purchase Boeing aircraft as well as soybeans and other agricultural commodities. So that's really the president's top priority. But for the Chinese, their top priority, and they've been quite clear about this, is really to discuss political issues, above all Taiwan. We've seen this most recently in an authoritative commentary in the state-run People's Daily. We've also seen Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized the importance of the Taiwan question in his call with Secretary of State Marco Rubio last week. So I anticipate actually that the Chinese are going to push quite hard on President Trump for either concessions on U.S. rhetorical policy towards Taiwan. So some of the things that we believe China wants is for President Trump to formally oppose Taiwan independence, where U.S. policy is to not support Taiwan independence. And as we saw just yesterday, when the president was asked whether arms sales to Taiwan would be on the agenda, he said that's something that I'm going to talk to Xi Jinping about. And so I think that the Chinese could also try to put pressure on President Trump to restrict arms sales to Taiwan. And that would be a very big deal because the United States has been a consistent provider of weapons to Taiwan to ensure that it can defend itself from Chinese aggression. This is a decades-long partnership that the United States has with Taiwan. And frankly, no other country is willing or prepared to step into the void if the United States were to stop selling these weapons to Taiwan. So that would be a very big deal. I think it's going to be an uphill battle for Xi Jinping to convince President Trump to make those concessions, but I think he'll try to do so.
And what do you think Donald Trump will actually do then? We heard today the Taiwanese president, for example, thanking the US for its unwavering commitment to security. But is that commitment really all that unwavering in the era of Donald Trump? It's really hard to know what exactly he's going to say or do this week, isn't it?
I think you're exactly right. And the other thing that we know about President Trump is that he can say something in Beijing this week, and he can do a 180 next week or the week after, and then he can go back to his other position a few weeks after that. The interesting dynamic that we have in U.S. politics right now, though, is that this administration is incredibly top-down. The policy is set by the president and it's implemented by the people working in the administration. And so there was a White House background briefing given before the president went to Beijing, and that official said that U.S. policy towards Taiwan has not changed and will not change. But, we should be very clear about it. President Trump can change U.S. policy towards Taiwan in Beijing. That's his prerogative. And my own view is that if he chooses to do so, it will be implemented throughout his administration. I don't think it'll be resisted. And Congress only has certain tools at its disposal to really, push the president's hand on this. So we've seen some letters from senators urging the president to stand firm on U.S. commitments to Taiwan and also urging him to approve a $14 billion arms package to Taiwan that has been held up in the White House for months now. We saw Senator Mitch McConnell press Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on U.S. support for Taiwan today, but Defense Secretary Hegseth was reluctant to really commit to that. So I think you're right. The president has a lot of leeway here. He could choose to change U.S. policy towards Taiwan, and Congress only has so many things that it can do to really try to rein that in.
And from the Taiwanese point of view, then, what's best case scenario for Taipei when it comes to this summit? What will it be hoping to hear and see during this week of Trump's visit to Beijing?
I think the best case scenario in Taipei is that nothing comes of this summit as it pertains to Taiwan. From their perspective, nothing good can come of this meeting in Beijing between Trump and Xi. So I don't think that there's anything that they believe the two leaders can agree to that would be in their interest. I think they hope that the summit really focuses on economic issues as well as the war in Iran, potentially, fentanyl cooperation and things like that. And that basically there's not enough time to discuss Taiwan and to have an in-depth exchange of views here, or that they basically just agree to disagree and move on. So, they would point to the fact that President Trump and Xi Jinping have had multiple conversations in his second term, and U.S. policy towards Taiwan has remained unchanged. So they're optimistic about that. But again, I think that the dynamics here, the fact that President Trump will be in Beijing, there will be much longer meetings than, for instance, the meeting between the two leaders in South Korea a year ago, will give Xi Jinping the opportunity to really put forward his case on Taiwan and to press President Trump on this question. And then I think the question that we all would ask is, does the president prioritize U.S. support for Taiwan over questions like, economics or the Iran war or fentanyl and things like that? And I think that that's a very open question.
And Taiwan accuses Beijing of ramping up the campaign to isolate it internationally. It's also for some time been facing mounting military pressure from China. Do you think Xi Jinping is being emboldened by what he's seeing happening elsewhere in the world, particularly when it comes to the policies of Donald Trump? What do you think he's ultimately going to do when it comes to Taiwan?
Well, I think that the Chinese are very confident in the policy that they have towards Taiwan now, which is to put an enormous amount of pressure on President Lai and the DPP government in power, and to open up dialogue with the opposition party, the KMT. And we saw the chairman of the KMT travel to Beijing just a few weeks ago for a quite rare visit to Beijing. And so it wants to show the Taiwanese voters that there's a choice here, and that a vote for the DPP in local elections later this year and in the presidential election in 2028 is a vote for continued pressure and isolation, and that a vote for the KMT would be a vote for engagement and rapprochement with Beijing. And so that's really the proposition that China and Xi Jinping are trying to put forward. And I think, as you note, they've seen that they can continue to ramp up the pressure, exert pressure through multiple domains, not just military, but also economic, political, the information space as well, and that they haven't seen a meaningful pushback from the United States. So I think that they're going to continue to go down this path, and for the next 2 years, we should expect much more pressure on President Lai and the government in power in Taiwan. Just one recent example is that Zambia was going to host RightsCon, which is a convention on digital rights. They had invited Taiwan to send participants from civil society to participate, and China put pressure on Zambia to rescind those invitations, and the whole conference ended up getting canceled. So I think we're going to continue to see enormous efforts by Beijing to isolate Taiwan.
David, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for that analysis and for being with us on the programme this evening. That is David Sachs, Fellow for Asia Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations.